Hello and welcome back to Season 3 of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. As always, I'm Rob Nelson.
And I'm Mike Bachov. In Season 3, we've been doing this a little while, huh?
Yes, covered quite a bit of ground already, but still lots of good content to come, I believe.
Absolutely. And today we are going to take a look at the Town Hall in Railroad Town, which has a really interesting history, but it's more the history of almost what's happening right now this minute.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode was chosen for a reason. We're also going to delve a little bit into 1890s politics. We are a museum that interprets the 1890s. So we're going to be talking a little bit later with Cynova, who's our Director of Interpretation. And then after that, in segment 2 of the podcast, we're going to be speaking live with Democracy in Action. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Tracy Overstreet is the Hall County Election Commissioner, and we went to her office. You'll hear the phones ringing in the background, and she is in the feverish midst of preparing for an election here in Hall County. And we're going to see what that looks like right on the front lines.
So stay with us, and we'll be back after these words. Welcome to another edition of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. My name is Rob Nelson. I'm here with Cynova, the Director of Interpretation here at Stuhr Museum. Today we're going to be talking about the Town Hall in Railroad Town and also the elections of the 1890s.
Ah, yes, elections.
I'm rather fond of this period and also the political cycles of the 1890s. I find them to be rather interesting.
It's very interesting, and it's also really interesting to look back at the historical record of the elections and everything that went on. And the newspapers had absolute field days. So just if you ever want entertainment, just go back, look at 19th century newspapers, type in whatever election you want to look at, and just read.
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same also.
Exactly.
If anyone is curious if this is a new thing that we're experiencing right now in terms of the vitriol that was expressed towards the varying parties, I assure you this is not a new phenomena.
There are eerie similarities.
Yes. Well, let's jump in and we'll first talk about our own structure in our railroad town located here at Stuhr Museum. We have the town hall on our grounds that is known as is it the Washington?
It is the Washington Township Hall.
What is the history associated with that name, being that it's in Grand Island?
It was in Washington Township, and if you want to get really technical, it is still within the confines of what was Washington Township.
Where was Washington Township?
Washington Township at one point in time was the area surrounding the city of Grand Island. It encompassed, it was basically all of this loose area around Grand Island, the city. And so in some cases, anybody who needed to vote, and that's why the whole reason the Township Hall was built, was it was a polling place. It was a place where people could go to vote. And it was built in 1890, and we actually have the township records, and we have the receipts that talk about how much it cost to build it and who built it and all of that. But it was built as a polling place. It was probably the most interesting thing is that the soldiers at the Soldiers and Sailors Home on the north end of town had to be put on little transports, horse-drawn transports, and brought down to the township hall on this end of the world here in the township in order to vote.
Wow.
And then they had to transport them back.
How much did it cost to build? You said that we had that in the record.
A whole $600. In fact, they very specifically limited the amount that we're only going to pay this. They posted and call for bids in the several of the April 1890s Grand Island newspapers, and put out the bids. But they said that they would specifically pay $300 up front, and then they would pay the rest of it kind of on a time contract for that. And there were three very specific receipts that I looked at in that file, and one was paid $300 to Franz Koning and Albert Hyde for making the town hall. And then there was a $2 receipt for the foundation ventilators.
Great.
And a $2 receipt for William Stolley, to inspect the building after it was constructed, and that was it was done by the 10th of May.
So Washington Township, Was that was a separate entity from Grand Island?
Correct.
Why was it in Grand Island?
At that time, it was not in Grand Island because
see.
that was outside of the confines of the city of
okay.
Grand Island. It was in the township. It was out in the county. Grand Island had not grown that far. Just to kind of get people's minds where the township hall sat. If anybody is familiar with Grand Island, Nebraska, on the corner of Locust and Stolly Street, there is a pizza place called Godfather's Pizza, and that's where the building sat before it came to Stuhr Museum.
I'm sure that will have a little bit of resonance with some people.
The locals, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
In particular. We were actually gifted the township hall. The township board, the electors present at their annual meeting in 1967, they voted and decided to give the township hall to the museum in January of 1967. They originally built it, as I said, as a polling place for the township, which was all the areas surrounding Grand Island. At one time, I guess there were two other similar structures in the county for polling, but this is the only one that survives. And the gift that the township made to the museum also included all of the furnishings, the voting booths, and the records of the township up to 1950.
I know that these buildings, we have one here and it survives, but they're not necessarily that well preserved nationally anymore. There are still a handful that survive, I think, but
there's pockets here and there. A lot of them probably were repurposed and used because a lot of buildings are remodeled over time and they are turned into other things. And you might have a hose house or a township hall and not even know that's what it was.
Exactly.
Because it's been redone. And that they were picked up, they were moved all over the place, they were remodeled. All of that stuff occurred to a lot of old structures.
And as towns grow, they need something that's bigger anyway to accommodate more people and more workers or what have you.
As they changed the way people voted and where they could vote, these polling places were eliminated and they changed the venue where those things took place. And for whatever reason, in the 19th century, you see a lot of hose houses, which is where the fire departments kept their equipment, and specific polling places like the township hall, those are where you did the voting. And as time went on, they moved into churches and schools and things like that because it could accommodate more people. City Hall was also a place that you could go vote. There was one other place that escapes me right at the moment, but those types of the places, that's where you could go vote. But then, everything evolves over time.
What other functions did the town halls have? Were they meeting places for other events going on in the community? Or was
a lot of social groups might, because I'm sure that the township would charge, just like you paid for a venue to go someplace and hold a meeting or something. Some social organizations, you might have some type of family gathering or something that might use the township hall. Our township hall, to me, is a fairly decent size. You could have a small gathering, 25 or 30 people in there and not really have a problem. We've done dinners, a dinner program in there a few years, many years ago, and utilized that place. And we had, I think it was 4 tables of 8 set up in there. They weren't in there very long, it was 3 tables of 8. But you could use it for a lot of different things.
Well, let's talk about, this is an election year. Let's talk a little bit about the elections of the 1890s, and I think specifically the election of 1896 really hits close to home, being that we're in Nebraska with the Democratic candidate of that year.
Yes.
William Jennings Bryan.
He did win the state, by the way.
He did win the state. He won most, if not all, of the Midwest.
Yeah, he got the agrarian vote,
yes.
Whereas his opponent got all of the cities and all of that stuff.
Yes. For those of you unaware, William McKinley, who was the governor of Ohio at the time, was the Republican nominee, and William Jennings Bryan from Nebraska, the former congressman, was the Democratic nominee. This election, I think, I am a 19th century historian by trade, I guess. it's particularly interesting to me just because of I feel like this election was kind of a turning point in American politics in a lot of ways, and from this point on until the present, you have this very much this modern template of how a campaign functions, whereas before it's still kind of that old world, just the way the campaign was conducted in terms of the way that they went out and engaged with the public and presented themselves as candidates. You really see this election kind of, there's a transformation that takes place.
Well, and you've got to consider this election is taking place in the midst of one of the largest global economic downturns that we've ever had, except for some of the more recent ones. But it really set the stage for what's happening today.
Yeah.
It impacted, we were in a huge recession. There was violent protests in the streets. There was a lot of unemployment. There was a lot of people who problems with the tariff policy that had been put in place, and a lot of violent strikes, massive unemployment.
Yeah, the Panic of 1893, which is kind of a misnomer, because it lasted for several years,
93 to 97, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it crippled a large part of the American economy. Thousands of businesses went under. Thousands of farmers lost their farms.
Yes.
And Brian really spoke to that wing, the latter part, the farmers. That's why he carried their vote, is because he was a proponent of something called free silver, or bimetallism, meaning that the American economy had previously and will continue to be part of the gold standard, meaning that every dollar issued by the federal government was backed by its worth in physical gold.
Yes.
It was the desire of the free silver movement to kind of expand that and inflate the U.S. currency to make more hard money available to struggling farmers.
There's more silver around than there was gold.
So if you have bimetallism, that creates more money that can be not generated, but put into the economy for struggling people, especially farmers in this instance. One of the most famous speeches in the history of American politics was given by William Jennings Bryan during this year. It's called the Cross of Gold speech. I have an excerpt of it here that, might as well have gotten
I figured
him.
You would.
You can actually go online and listen to this speech anytime you want, because it was recorded. But he said at the party convention in Chicago in July of 1896, he asserted that the gold standard was not only un-American, but anti-American. Having behind us the commercial interests and the laboring interests and all of the toiling masses, we shall answer their demands for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Meaning, I don't like the gold standard.
That's
we
right.
need more money.
Yeah.
To raucous applause, he was this little-known politician of not much renown. He had lost the Senate race, and he was sort of catapulted into being the nominee for a major party.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have a Nebraskan have the highest office.
Yeah, he's the closest we got. Gerald Ford was from Nebraska, born in Nebraska, but he claims Michigan as his home state. So we're still waiting for that first Nebraskan president.
Yeah, well, someday.
Someday indeed. But that's not the only election of the 1890s. The 1892 election I find a little bit interesting as well, simply because I think Grover Cleveland is an underrated American politician to be studied by historians out there. Mostly because he is one of only 3 American politicians to win the popular vote 3 times.
Right.
I mean, that's a very underrated category to have next to your name. Andrew Jackson, everyone knows. Franklin Roosevelt, everybody knows. The third, Grover Cleveland, I doubt 5% of Americans would know that name.
Yeah, a lot of people have no clue. I mean, if you start listing out presidents, it's like, Grover who?
Yeah, and he served non-consecutive terms. He won the popular vote in the Electoral College once. Then, upon his re-election, won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College. And the only reason he was not again nominated in 1896 was because of his support for the gold standard.
Yes.
He very might well have been in that rarefied era with FDR of winning the popular vote 4 times had he been a proponent of the gold standard. But the Democratic Party had fractured over this issue and nominated Bryan in 1896.
Yeah, it really changed. Yeah, 96, everything changed. The politics changed tremendously. Like I said, it set the stage for the future.
I mentioned a little bit earlier the kind of changing of the guard and the way that American politics was run around this time in the century. You can see this kind of transformation into politics, how it is now, by the way that the two campaigns, McKinley's and Bryan's, were run. Prior to this point, it was kind of considered, I don't know what the word you would say, just kind of being a braggart to insist upon yourself to be president and to campaign openly for the presidency. It was just sort of looked down upon for many, many years. And what politicians did was operate a front porch campaign where people would come to you, to your home and speak to you in person and express their support and maybe offer you food or drink in exchange for a few words. And then those people would leave and new people would come up to you, kind of like you were being summoned to be president in this very humble fashion.
Yeah, all the people come to you and say, "Oh, please, won't you be our president?"
Yeah, well, if you insist, maybe I will allow myself to be called upon, kind of. And that goes all the way back to Washington and how, no, I don't want it, please. Yeah. Oh, if you insist, no, I can't do it.
Oh, no, please, no, yeah. Don't ask. Okay, yeah, twist my arm.
Whereas the exact opposite thing happens with the Bryan campaign. And for the first time, I think ever, he stages a national campaign. And
he starts traveling and visiting places. And that's something that really didn't happen before that.
And it didn't work out for him this time. And it wouldn't work out for him the other two times he was the nominee for president. But he traveled in 1896, 18,000 miles and gave 600 speeches between July and November.
It's an exhausting schedule.
It's a gauntlet, and he went everywhere and said everything, and including in the day before the election, he was in several places in Omaha, including Grand Island, where we are currently right now. One other thing I'd like to talk about with you, Kay, is how those elections relate to the current era. I know, the technology was different, but in many ways, the elections sort of resemble how they are today.
Yeah, they in many ways there's a lot of similarities. Some of our technology wise for elections, we're just really starting to look at making some changes now. But there's a lot of similarities. A lot of stuff got published in the newspapers, and you can they would publish ballots, sample ballots, and all of that. But the newspaper accounts of the stuff that happened would be really interesting, how they would kind of set things up as well.
Were there any Grand Island newspapers that were pro one party versus another party?
Oh, let's see. The Grand Island Republican, the Democrat, there was the German language newspapers, they all were one side or the other. And Exactly. They were vociferous about their opinions in those newspapers.
Yeah, and I read a few when just preparing for this podcast that talking about the same speech, it was essentially the best speech of all time, or the person essentially embarrassed himself and fell down in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Is really how, does that sound familiar to you at all?
No, it doesn't sound familiar at all.
Yeah, exactly. So those things happened. There were, kind of going along with that, there were some campaign songs that really accomplished the same sorts of things.
And some of them, were like played really dirty, some of the terminology and everything that was used. And they would attack other candidates and in newspapers to the point of practically slander, or to the point of slander. In some cases. So again, it's very interesting to go back and look at all of those and read the history of any of these elections and see what kind of mud was being thrown at the time.
There's a song that I found that was very anti-Bryan that I'll just quote the first verse here. Have you heard about dat Bryan? He's just come to town. He is round among the voters with a gospel to expound. With a silly kind of dollar, he says he's found. I heard him read a message to the folks in Madison Square, he said he had a mission to kill out the millionaires and make the common people rich for fair.
Yeah, again, sounds eerily familiar.
Yeah. Just kind of throw in the word socialism, and I feel like it's the same kind of rhetoric.
Exactly.
But that's all the information I had to cover today. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, we talked a little bit about the township form of government. You see it referred to in the Grand Island newspapers a lot as the Australian, let's see, what do they call it? I just read that this morning. It wasn't the Australian model, but the townships were mainly for taking care of the roads. The people who were within the confines of the township, they took care of the roads so the county didn't have to. And that was their main point of existence. But they did do some other things, but they kind of lost their luster over the years. Grand Island, Hall County, just eliminated the township form of government for Hall County in 2016.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was around for a long time, and there are still a handful of counties within the state that are holding on to the township form of government.
Are there any other ones in Nebraska?
Yeah, in Nebraska, yeah. There's in 2010, and there was 24 counties that still had the township form of government. And so there have been some since then who have voted to eliminate that. Sure. So it's probably under 20 by now, but I haven't seen any recent records on it. There's actually a lot of information about how a township was supposed to operate. I actually found a really nice kind of piece that you could download from the state that had all the information about how a township operates and how they're supposed to handle finances and all of that stuff, to the point of how they were supposed to eliminate. It has to be voted on by the people in the county to choose to change the form of government from township to the commissioner form. So, which is what Grand Island finally did. They had several opportunities to vote out the township form of government starting in 1913, but it took till 2016 before the county residents decided to finally vote that form of government out.
Wow. So the town hall that we interpret in Railroad Town is what sorts of votes would the people have been involved in, like casting a vote personally?
Well, it's whatever election was. So there was a lot of local, kind of like not presidential elections, sure. but there were, if it was a presidential election, that's where you went to vote. And so that you could have presidential, you could have county board member vote, you could have school district members, school board sure. type of thing. So whatever election, whatever, things that the state needed votes on, that's where you would go to vote. And same with the hose houses.
Well, it definitely played an important role in any small community like Grand Island, and it continues to play an equally important role here in Railroad Town on a daily basis.
That's right. We have some of the polling boxes, and which are just metal boxes that you put a hasp on. And we have one of the voting booths in the town hall. It's kind of tucked into the entryway there. But if you get down to Railroad Town sometime, you can pop in and see. It's just a wooden frame with some cloth so that nobody can see what you're doing when sure. you're in the voting booth. Short
and sweet, but it accomplished the job.
It did.
We're going to leave it there. Thank you, Cynova. It's always a joy when you're on the podcast.
It's a lot of fun.
Well, stick with us, and we will be back after these words.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Henry Glade Roller Mill. The Henry Glade Roller Mill, dealers in flour, meal, feed, and etc. This mill is equipped with the latest improved rollers and gradual reduction milling machine and has a capacity of 200 bushels per day. Located at North Front and Hagee Street in Railroad Town, Henry Glade and Company, proprietors, and they are welcome to receive your solicitations.
Welcome back to the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. We are here with Tracy Overstreet. She is the Elections Commissioner for Hall County, Nebraska. Tracy, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so we are right now in Election HQ.
Yes, absolutely.
We're in the Hall County Election Office. To the right, in the Hall County meeting room where the county board meets. People are voting as we speak. To the left, your offices are going crazy. First off, thanks for taking the time. This is a crazy time of year for you.
It's pretty busy. I mean, we've had a lot of demand for by mail voting. So we've got that kind of processing going on. We've also started with in-person early voting. So there's people coming in and doing that. And there's still people getting registered to vote to get ready for the election. So it's all gamut of anything election-y is going on. Yes, very
Absolutely.
much so.
All right.
Well, let's jump in. We have a few questions to ask you just about what it is you do and how it kind of relates to the history of that area of work. We were just talking about it being busy here. Is there anything that the people of Hall County can do to make your life easier this election season?
Well, the first and foremost thing is to get registered to vote and to do it in a timely manner. And, there's some deadlines coming up October 16th to get registered to vote if you're going to do it online, and the 23rd to do it in person. But it's really important to have good, accurate data before you head into an election. That's really the key thing. And so if people have changes of addresses or names, if they do that and just get ready for Election Day, that's really the most important thing to get ready for a very busy election.
All right. Is there anything obviously with COVID, there are things that are weird about this election, but with everything that's odd, how are people seem to be handling it? Is it going pretty well? I mean, do people have the information they need, or has everyone kind of waited to the last minute?
Well, I think people are really doing more toward voting earlier than in past. I mean, it was Election Day. Now it's really election month.
No, that's
because the month leading up to the election in Nebraska, you can do early voting, and that's really when everybody's attention to the election starts to kick in. And the COVID thing is really making people more active earlier than we have seen in past elections. So you talk about what's different, really, what's new and different with this election. It almost feels like a sanitation event more than an election, because we've got not only the planning for booking the polling place and getting poll workers for Election Day and our ballot boxes and ballots and all those things that we think are typical for election, like the I voted sticker, the very important sticker. We're also having to think of masks and gloves and face shields and disinfectants and all of those things that go along with the pandemic.
Yeah. Is there like a hard, fast date that somebody should absolutely have their mail-in ballot in by? I know that I feel like the mail goes from Grand Island to Omaha and then back to Grand Island.
Yeah, I would not put anything in the mail for your ballot in the mail after October 26th.
Okay.
So if you want it to count, and it needs to be
too far from here.
Yeah, it's not too far from here. But some of the other things that are different. This started in the primary this year. We had some new equipment for ADA. For people who have difficulty in marking a ballot, we actually have this, it's called an express vote. It's really cool. It's touch screen thing, but it also has a touch pad on it that's in Braille, and it also has headphones if you prefer to have your ballot read to you.
Wow.
These are things that people didn't used to have back in the day. And you can actually even plug in a device and do sip and puff if you want to control the voting with your breath. So
wow.
Those are really cool things. The other thing that we have done, we're utilizing the internet a lot more. And, I found that a lot of people don't really know what city council ward they're in or what school board ward they're in. So they look at this composite ballot that we print that has every candidate for that election. And they study like everything, and then they get in and they only have one city council race, or maybe, they get confused about which is their representative. So we've tried to pare it down and make it more efficient for people to get ready for Election Day by putting everyone's individual ballot on the internet. And we have that this year. So it's Nebraska Voter Check. And if you Google that and you go to that site, you put in your first name, your last name, and your county, and it will bring up and tell you where your polling place is And then right below your polling place, there's a little sample ballot. So you can actually see what every race is, what every judge's name is, what every ballot question is. So there's no surprises on election day.
Are all of those changes unique to this coming election? This is the first election we're going to have those, or some of those been implemented
express
already?
vote with the touchscreen voting we had in the primary, but not a single person used it because we didn't have very many people at the polling site. So if anybody votes on an express vote for the general election in Hall County, they will have their inaugural use by that individual. And same is true with our ballots on voter check. It's the first time we've offered that for people to be able to see their ballot before they go in to look it up online, what it's going to look like.
That's great. You wouldn't expect there to be innovations during this. I feel like the consensus might be just let's get this done and as easy as we can. Yeah.
No, we've added some new things because we want to make it as easy as possible for people and as comfortable as possible, because we do know a lot of people are really edgy and concerned about the pandemic. People are also edgy and keyed up just with the way politics are heading into this season. It's just a different dynamic for this election.
Well, that's never happened before.
No,
right?
absolutely
People have never been just super keyed up about an election.
No, we talked in the previous segment with Cynova, who's our Director of Interpretations, about the election of 1896 and how even though the technology was a little bit different back then, or much different, they still had rival newspapers that, reporting on the same event, it would be, either the greatest speech ever given or the person essentially fell down the stairs and, forgot the words during the speech or something. So
yeah, this is nothing. It feels new, but it's not new.
One of the things that's really the mainstay for our state in elections, though, is the paper ballot. And as we look at other states, and other states have done innovations and done some online voting and that kind of thing, and they've tried them and failed, they look to Nebraska really as the gold star for an election state, because you can't hack paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was back in the day. It was that way, and we still have that today. Now we're using pens. We have gone from pencil to pen, but we still use paper.
Ink.
Right.
Can't hack ink. Absolutely.
Well, that kind of brings me to the next the roundabout to the next idea is that we're looking at this from a historical perspective. Is there anything weird about Hall County? Is Hall County unique in any way in terms of how it needs to not conduct its elections, but just the way it's set up, the people who vote, the way they vote? Anything stand out about our little corner of the world that makes it unique?
Well, I think we have a great little microcosm of the world here in Hall County. And I think one of the things that really has floored me is we've had 1,000 new registered voters between the primary and the general election, which I think is just really crazy interest. And, we've talked too with celebrating this year with women's suffrage that all of that work done by women, the Abbott women and all of those great leaders, what a tribute to them, because women are the leaders at the polls now. I mean, there's more women voting there. And I just think that Hall County, we're not unique. We follow the gold star, but we've had good voter turnout and good participation. And I think this election, we're even going to see record attendance. And I don't know if that's going to happen across Nebraska, but I'm seeing just a lot more interest, and people of all age groups, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 60s, 70s, coming to register for the first time. So I think that we're going to be, for ourselves, unique in having greater participation than we ever have before.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I read the article that was in the Grand Island Independent just the other day, or maybe it was even today, about how we're expecting to have greater numbers of turnout. I think we're already over the number for 2016 in terms of mail-in voting for Hall County by a couple thousand, isn't that right?
That's true. We had about 6,000 early votes in the last presidential in 2016, and we've already issued 8,500. But on top of that, Hall County is kind of peaked out at 33,500 registered voters, and we've added 1,000 more in a matter of a couple of months. So that is just surprising to me.
That's great.
So what if you had to? We're not going to hold you hold you to this, but if you had to guess on what turnout is going to be for this election, what would you eyeball it at?
Well, the last presidential in 2016 was at 67%. So I'm hoping we hit at least 70. And I mean, that's going to be my conservative number. I mean, the way I'm seeing people wanting to participate, I'm thinking, could we make 73, 74, 75%?
And that would put us well above the national average.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
I mean, we're kind of there anyway. Isn't the national average somewhere around 40%?
And it would set a new high for Hall County as well. I'm hoping we can get there.
Yeah.
That's always a great goal to shoot for. I just had one other question. I don't know about you, Mike, but being that this is a history podcast, and I'm sure you have an interest in elections, and just being a county commissioner, is there something that drew you to this field in history, like the election of 1920, the first election that women could vote in, or anything like that? Is there an election that you would have liked to have been a part of, either voting or been the commissioner for?
I think it would have been really fun to be in some of those elections with Lincoln.
Sure.
That Lincoln won, and actually that Lincoln lost.
Yeah, the Senate election.
It wasn't not your first time, your first race. You don't always win, and I also think it would have been really fun back in the day when campaigning was done on the back of a train.
Yes.
And the stumping that was going around, and it was community events, and everyone gathered, and that's the message that you got, and you heard it one time, you didn't hear little blips and tweets and everything every other day or every hour of every day, but you really got to see the person and their personality, and people made their judgment on that. So I think that would have been really cool and would have been fun to be part of. Plus, they had some really great patriotic wardrobing back in the day too, and I think that would be super fun to be part of.
Yeah, I think we've come a long way from the 1858 debates between Douglas and Lincoln, where they I think the format was they spoke for an hour, and then the next person had like an hour and a half, and then the first person had a half hour to rebut them, and that was the debate, like uninterrupted for an hour.
Right, uninterrupted.
Exactly.
That's really a big key point.
I think that's a joint appearance, not a debate, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the one last thing I wanted to give you an opportunity to do is give someone your pitch for why voting is important. Because let's just pretend you're one of those people who think my vote doesn't matter. What would you say to them, and what would you encourage them to do? Because voting is a little bit of a chore, but why do it?
It is a little bit of a chore if you want to do it right, and I think be prepared. And I do hear people sometimes say that one vote doesn't matter, and it really does. I mean, I went back and got some of our big red leather bound abstract books of our past elections, and there was this election from 1971, which isn't that far back, but it's not as far back as Stuhr history.
Sure.
But and actually, it was a school bond vote, and it passed by 0.2 of a vote. I mean, it wasn't even a full vote because it had to pass by a certain percentage of votes cast. So, I mean, it's less than a vote sometimes that makes a difference on how a measure is passed or failed. And I think it's really important too. I think some people say, well, I don't want to vote because I'm not political. And maybe they don't want to take sides with the party. And I guess I can understand that. I mean, some people get tired of all of the banter that goes back and forth between the two parties. But when you stop and think about what affects your life on a daily basis, a lot of those decisions are not political based bodies, your city councils and your school boards. I mean, and they're affecting decisions, what kind of parks that you have in your community, what kind of streets you drive on, what kind of housing you have, what kind of economic development incentives come to your community, what kind of things your children are learning in school. And it also affects all of the taxes that you pay and the pay rates that you have. I mean, salaries and all of those things. And so it's hugely important to communicate with your government on what you want your world to look like, whether it's just in your own community or in your state or in your country or in your world. And if you're not voting, then you're being silent and you're not affecting helping guide the future. And quite frankly, you're riding on somebody else's coattails because somebody else before you helped make those decisions so that there was a Stuhr Museum, so that there was a grocery store on a corner, so that there was some opportunity in a community. And if you're not stepping forward and doing it now, then you're just taking up space and you're riding on somebody else's coattails.
Absolutely. Very well said.
I like it. Well, thank you for taking the time, Tracy, and we'll let you get back to work.
Thank you.
Well, that was quite a conversation. I enjoyed talking to both Tracy and Kay. They both had unique insights to bring to the table.
Yeah, and if I think there's a message that Tracy has for everybody, it's that if you haven't voted, maybe consider going out and doing that. It's a vital part of our civic democracy. It's got history. It's got modern implications. If you're not feeling that spirit stirred inside you, I hope this did it for you.
No pun intended, stirred inside of you.
Yeah, there you go.
I just want to stress that I think it's important that no matter what side of the political spectrum you might find yourself, that voting is important. I want everybody to vote. I don't, want to take a side here. I think it's a sacred duty of Americans to participate in our elections now more than ever, especially in an environment that's so vitriolic at times.
Yeah, absolutely. Be counted, be represented, understand that these things not just have consequences, but benefits, and that it's extraordinarily important for you to get out there and do. So that was our podcast on the town hall. What are we doing next week, Rob?
Next week, we are talking about all things Halloween. Halloween has a definite interest to a lot of people in this country, but it has for many, many years. And we're going to delve into some of those conversations about what Halloween has looked like in years past.
All right, so we'll try to hollow out some time for that, and we'll be back next week with season 3, episode 2. Thank you for listening to the Stuhr Crazy Podcast.